Hello everyone, my name's Derek. I've been birding for over 10 years now and commenting on birding, the bird world, and birds in pop culture for quite some time. So I'm going to do a review of Adventures in Love and Birding from a birder's perspective. And this is a recent Hallmark movie that was based on a book called Birding with Benefits by Sarah T. Dubb. I've heard that the book is more an adult book and the Hallmark movie is of course family friendly. So I'm going to tell you 5 things that I liked about it or that I heard other people liked about it. So kind of the good side and then also the bad. 5 things I wish were a little bit different as a birder or just as a movie watcher. And this also includes things that other people have commented that they said that they wished may have been done a little bit differently. So I'm kind of going to give you both perspectives here and definitely my thoughts as someone in the bird world. Now, a little synopsis on the movie that I'm going to read from the Hallmark website. It says a single mom agrees to be the partner of a bird enthusiast for a birding competition, but misunderstands the assignment and tells everyone she's his new girlfriend instead of just his teammate, starring Rachel Boston and Andrew Walker. So the female lead, her name is Celeste, and the male's lead in the movie is John. This is going to contain spoilers, so if you haven't watched the movie yet and you don't want anything ruined, you may want to watch that and then come back to this video. So overall, it was really cool to see birding in a Hallmark movie, but there were definitely some things that made me want to scream at the television when we were watching them as someone in the bird world. We're going to start with the good, and then we'll move on to the bad section. So number 1 on the good list is that it's a Hallmark movie. So if you love the way most Hallmark movies are, where they're a little bit cheesy, they kind of have a predictable plot, you kind of know what's going to happen, you'll probably love this movie, and I of course appreciate the birding in it, but if you're just a fan of feel-good Hallmark movies in general, you probably will enjoy this one. We'll come back to this a little bit later, but it definitely followed that Hallmark movie formula. Moving on to number 2. It really showed the new birder perspective well. So originally Celeste is kind of on the fence. She's like, I don't really want to do that. I don't want to do the birding thing. And then she realizes that she likes it, she's having fun with it, and she really dives into the deep end. She orders all the stuff. She gets the smart bird feeder that you can watch on your phone. These do really exist. You can put it up in your yard, and she gets different clothing, kind of over the top, you know, like vests, things that most birders don't necessarily wear all the time. It's kind of the stereotype, but you know, she's buying the clothes. She gets kind of the nerdy t-shirt, which I thought was funny. And I thought John said it perfectly. He said something like, oh, it's nerdy, but like also I like it. So I thought that was funny. They did a really good job showing that transition of her being on the fence, not really wanting to do it, to then kind of getting obsessed with the hobby, which happens to a lot of people. So I thought that was a good job on that one for sure. There's also a moment in here where Celeste sees a great blue heron and she's kind of in awe. And I feel like that's what most people would call a spark bird moment. It's a bird that gets you into the hobby, and I feel like you kind of see that in action, where it's something that really amazes her and it makes her want to keep going. So there's a couple of those moments that was good in there. And then you do have this relationship a lot with birders and significant others where one of them is really obsessed and they meet someone who's not necessarily a birder, but they like hiking and being outside. And you have this dynamic of them getting them really into the hobby. So you kind of have that dynamic in this, and that is something you see a lot in the birding world. Moving on to number 3. We have some really nice bird footage. So we'll talk about the IDs later on some of these, but they have some nice clips of real birds that you would see in the area that this is supposed to take place, which is California. So you see a scrub jay in there, you see a great blue heron, there's some pileated woodpecker, some nice shots of birds, and I'm glad they did a little bit of research to get some of those species in the right area. So some pretty bird footage in this movie. Next up, we have number 4. Birding in pop culture. It's just refreshing to see this in something like a Hallmark movie because there's not a ton of birding themed things. It's not always in the mainstream. There was a movie called The Big Year that did a good job putting birding into the spotlight, but it's always cool to see other things and have it be more of a mainstream thing. I also thought it showed birding in a really positive light. It looked very social, it looked very fun. They kind of did it in a relaxed way, even though part of it's supposed to be a competition. So I thought that they showcased that really well, and I'm hoping that this might attract some new birders. They might say, hey, that looks fun, let me try it, and they'll dip their toes into it and see if it's something that they like. And then for number 5, there are some accurate portrayals of birding and the bird world. There are some ones that didn't really hit the mark, but there were some that really do happen. For example, in the Birdathon, the competition that they're in, the teams have quirky play on words names. You'll see a lot of those if there are, you know, birdathons or competitions that people do. It'll play on like took a turn for the worse, like there's a bird called a tern, you know, took a turn. A lot of that stuff is real. I thought the person they had play the president of the Audubon Society acted very much like an Audubon president would, trying to get the new people involved. Very nice, very friendly, very welcoming, at least in my experience. They did a good job with that. It was kind of funny, they talk about Celeste wearing muted colors as the female to not draw attention to the mom bird on the nest, and then John being in more of the bright colors trying to attract a mate. So some of that stuff was funny and really did portray birding in the real world. And also, birdathons do exist, not normally in the way that they portrayed, but we'll get to that a little bit later. So definitely some nice accurate portrayals of birding and birders. Also, another thing was they said in California during migration, you can see 200 birds in a weekend. That's true. There's a lot of different species in California, so that was a pretty accurate estimate of the numbers of birds you can see in a single weekend during migration. Additionally, there was a scene where they had a yellow warbler they showed, and I actually heard the correct yellow warbler vocalizations. That was nice. They got some of those right. Some of those they got wrong. We'll get to that later, but that was one that I caught that I was like, yeah, that's good. One other thing that was a nice addition is they talked about James Bond. So that is actually a birder reference. He was a guy who wrote a field guide, and the person who wrote James Bond was looking for a really generic name, and he had the field guide, and so he picked James Bond. So that story actually is true, and you can thank the birder James Bond for, the James Bond name and use in the series. So now we'll move on to our bad section, or things that I wish were a little bit different, or other people have mentioned that they wished were different. So to start with number one, it's a Hallmark movie. So if you don't like Hallmark movies, you're probably not gonna like this one. Like I said, it follows the same formula. It's kind of that feel-good cheesy movie. So if that's not your vibe, I probably wouldn't watch this one. But like I said, if you like it, great, you'll probably like this one too. Next up, we have unrealistic birding. So this was something that other people had mentioned with birdathons aren't normally 3 weekends. So from what I've seen, birdathons are normally like 1 day, and normally it's to raise money for some kind of conservation-focused mission, not to win money for yourself as the winning team. And in this, they said there was like a 5-figure prize, which I thought was kind of crazy. But I did some research, and it does seem like you could do a 3-weekend thing, so that's not totally out of the question, but normally that's not how it's structured, and it's more to raise money, get people involved. It's not like, hey, let's win the grand prize and get all this notoriety. So that was something that was not completely accurate. Also, John does not seem like a guy that wants to win the prize, because he has this whole approach in the movie where it's like, hey, let's take things slow, enjoy it. If you were actually trying to win the birdathon, you would be trying to go to the edges of the place where your search area is to find the rarest birds. You would have things reported. You'd have to go there immediately. You would try to get those birds that are like one-day wonders, only there for a second. So you'd also be waking up super early. You would be taking it way more seriously if you were really trying to win. So I kind of think this idea of him being like, I'm going to take the slow approach and that's going to win us the thing. That's not how it would be. He would be dragging Celeste around being like, oh, I just heard this. We got to go here. We got to find this. So that would be totally different. And it didn't show kind of the difficult part of birding. Like they went to see something and they missed it. It kind of kept it really casual, which I think appeals to more the new birder. But for serious competition, things would be getting more intense. You'd have people running to try to get to places. It would be more of a grind and more of a competitive atmosphere. So that's something that if that was really going on, it would be much more competitive. They would have more obstacles to face. It would be different than it was. But that's kind of the direction they took, different from what it probably would really be. Although in the end, they didn't win. So maybe that's because they didn't do all those things and, took the extra steps. They also ended before it was dark one day. Normally you would bird the entire day, probably even into the night. So that's very different. There's also a scene where they're like doing duck calls and they have mallard ducks fly in. That's not something you see out in the field, and they would get, mallard very easily. Also, so somebody didn't like that there was a house finch on one of the signs for the birdathon, that was too common of a bird. But house finches originated out west, so I feel like they're more respected as like a native species out in the western US as opposed to the east. But that didn't bother me. That actually kind of made sense. So just something somebody else caught that I didn't think was too much of an issue. Going on to number 3, we have their gear choices. So this was another thing that other people really didn't like, but I thought was fine. So in the movie, they're using what's called poro prism binoculars. It is kind of an older, more bulky design. So it's based on the way the prisms are in here that reflect the light. So it is, not something a ton of people use. They're still out there. People do use them. But if you were more serious, you'd probably have a pair of roof prism binoculars. This is what most of the ones you see now are. And they're a little more compact. So I think for something on screen, this stands out more as like, oh, I'm bird watching. This is a little more compact and harder to see. So it may have been a choice of, we want to make it really obvious that they're birding. So a lot of people didn't like their bulky gear. I didn't really have a problem with it. These are still around not a ton of people use them, but you still could if you wanted to. He also didn't give her any tips on how to use them. That's kind of the first thing. If you had a new birder, you'd be like, this is how you use your binoculars. And speaking of that, I did a whole video about mastering binoculars for beginners. So if you're new and you want to learn more about them and how to use them, you can check out that video. But again, something other people had issue with. I didn't really have too much issue with it, but it is interesting kind of noting those differences. Next up, we have the ID mistakes. And this was the thing that kind of makes you want to scream at the TV, because I feel like if you just had one person to consult that knew about bird ID whatsoever, they could have fixed a ton of this stuff. I'm only going to mention a few of the big ones, but there is obviously a mountain bluebird on screen and they call it a western bluebird. So that's one where you're just like, like how did they get that one wrong? They go to look for a spotted owl, which would be insanely rare. They're really hard to find in their own right. And they show them finding it, and it doesn't show them having a ton of excitement finding it. Normally there would be way more like joy and, you know, oh, that's so insane that we found it. And they also show a burrowing owl. So they didn't get the owl species right. Then later they're like, yeah, but at least we saw that spotted owl. And to people that know about birds, it's just like, they did not see the spotted owl. So those were tough. And another one, they show a great horned owl, and I think they call it a screech owl. And I feel like if you just consulted someone who knew a little bit about bird ID, they could have fixed a lot of those issues. The movie The Big Year that I talked about, they consulted Greg Miller, who's a really good birder, to kind of make it more realistic. And I really wish they did that with this film. It would have helped it out a lot. And then finally at number 5, we have the guy's guiding business. And this really frustrated me because he was like, depending on how I do in this birdathon, if I do well, you know, if we win, I'll start my guiding business. And if not, you know, I'll do something else. You can start a guiding business super easy. You don't need anything to start. He could do it while he has his other job. Like, it's basically just taking people out birding. He says he wants to do it for beginners. There's nothing holding him back from doing this. He could just start it immediately, you know, start calling people, be like, hey, do you want to go on a bird tour? Like, he doesn't need all this extra stuff. He could run it as a side hustles. That kind of frustrated me that was his whole thing, you know, to start this thing. He could have done it whenever. So yeah, it was some stuff that was hard to watch, but I did really appreciate that they had birding in there. They showed it in a very positive light. I think it could attract new people to the hobby. They did get some stuff right. They did definitely get some stuff wrong. So it was a mixed bag, but I'm really curious to hear what you thought of it in the comments below. And if you're interested in learning about birding, we have so many resources for new beginners. There's a Birding 101 if you want to start there. There's that binocular guide. So a ton of resources. But overall, it was really cool to see birding in a Hallmark movie. Let me know what you thought in the comments below. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on Badgerland Birding.